Dezombified presents a compilation of 9 scary viewer-submitted horror stories.
So basically, we live in a haunted house. It was crazy cheap when we bought it. I feel like a cliche saying this, but now we know why. Since we've moved here, it's been one thing after the other. Our dog got hit by a car and died. Our 6-year-old talks to someone no one else sees. Everybody's always in a bad mood. We fight all the time. Things go missing regularly. We miss appointments. It goes on and on. On the surface, it seems like we're just a dysfunctional family. But we weren't always like this. Weird stuff happens to us all the time now. I remember one time we were all eating dinner together. We were having such a good time, talking and laughing. All of a sudden, an empty chair just moved all by itself. It slid all the way to where the dining room ends and the family room begins. It's almost as if something was angry that we were acting like an actual family. Another time, when I was coming up my driveway, I noticed that there was a man looking out at me from the attic window. I panicked because my husband was at work and no one else could have been in the house. The kids were all at school. I waited outside while I called the cops in a panic. When they got there, they searched the house from top to bottom. They found nothing. Nobody could have left the house without being seen. Our home is completely fenced in. You would need a very tall ladder to climb over. Believe me, I was waiting to see if anyone walked out because I have a concealed carry, and I was prepared to protect my property. But no one came. But the scariest thing that has happened so far happened to our teenage son. He told us that one night he felt himself being pulled out of bed. I won't say much more because I told him to write to you guys about it himself. Anyway, what can we do? All of our money is tied up in this house. Seems like that's always the case with these things.
It was the summer of 1973, Arlen, Texas. My youngest sister and only sibling, Jessica, was crazy about dolls, and still is. She had plenty of them, and thank goodness we each had our own room. Mom loved yard sales, and we'd go with her from time to time. The yard sale we went to that day had this really old, creepy house. I remember feeling nauseated because of the bad vibes it gave me. The new owners bought the house and everything in it, and wanted to get rid of most of it. The yard was huge and full of all sorts of things. Weren't too many people there on account of the heat. Mom gave us each $3. After a while, an old photo album caught my eye. The pictures in it were really old. One photo in particular struck me the most. It was of a child that looked like my sister. She was sad and holding a doll in a red dress, and the house was in the background. Time passed and we went home. Later that evening, I passed by my sister's room. She was having a conversation, and I wondered with who. I opened the door and saw her holding the same doll from the photo, but there was no one else with her. I asked who she was talking to. She said Greta, her new doll. I closed the door and went to bed. I didn't think much about it. But a few days later, something happened. Me and Jessica got into an argument. Mom scolded me, but it wasn't my fault. I was really angry at her, so I ran into her room and ripped the arms off her favorite doll, and she began to cry. I was sent to bed without supper. Later that night, I woke up and found Greta standing on my bed, staring at me. Her jet black hair standing on end. She wasn't smiling anymore. Instead, she had an evil look. Her black eyes pierced my soul, and I was frozen in fear. We stood that way until I passed out of exhaustion. I woke up and she was gone. This happened over and over the next few nights. Mom started to notice dark circles under my eyes. She took me to see the doctor. I told him what was happening as I started to cry. He advised my mother to get me therapy and prescribed me sleeping pills. I tried to speak to Jessica about it. I begged her to get rid of it, but she refused. She told me that if I apologized to her in front of Greta, that she might stop. I was so desperate, so I gave it a shot. Lo and behold, it worked. I got some of the best sleep I've had in days. I stood far away from Greta, not even a glance I gave her. Time passed, and eventually I got used to Greta. I'd say things to her like, "Good morning, Greta," and the like. She was family now. Mom was a widow and started dating Paul, a local mechanic. He was cool. He treated me and Jessica like his own. Mom was happy and things were going great, but Mom was the jealous type, and when Paul's ex started coming around, things went south. Mom went to her job one day and dragged her out into the street by her hair. I was in the car with Jessica and Greta and saw the whole thing. Next, she went by Paul's garage and made a huge scene. We went home, and later that night, Paul showed up. Jessica had misplaced Greta, so she let us stay up a bit past our bedtime to look for her. We didn't find her. Mom sent us to bed, and they resumed their argument. I was with Jessica in her room, and we were both scared. We heard glass breaking and lots of foul language. Things finally settled down, and Mom came to check on us and bring us milk and cookies. Paul had given her a black eye. Jessica was upset and started to cry. I shuddered, knowing that Greta hates seeing Jessica upset. We fell asleep. A couple of hours later, Mom screamed, waking us up. I told Jessica to stay put while I investigated. I went downstairs and saw Paul in the club chair, dead. The look of fear stuck on his face. I could relate. Blood dripped from his eyes down his face. He held a crushed can of beer in his left hand, a puddle of it on the floor. His right hand clutched the armrest, tight. There on the sofa facing Paul's direction was Greta. Jessica swore to me that she searched there. Could Paul have found her, then put her there? That, my friends, I'll never know. But the one thing I'm certain of is, Greta winked at me, and I nearly pissed myself. Cops didn't know what to make of it and ruled it death by natural causes. I knew better, and there was nothing natural about it or Greta. Seeing him there like that saddened me. If his ex would have let him be, and if Mom wasn't so jealous, he'd still be with us. Needless to say, since that night, I've been the best brother a girl could ever have. Jessica eventually married. She now has a son of her own, Drew, and a daughter, Millie, whom she gave Greta to, a vengeful guardian heirloom that no one, and I mean no one, should ever cross.
I was living in the South Bronx. I was about 8 months pregnant. I had invited a family friend to live with me while she got settled into her own place. She was a pastor and had a 12-year-old boy. Many Christians believe that Christ is the shepherd, our pastor, if you will. So pastors speak for Christ in the church. The project complex I was residing in at the time was very dangerous and violent. I could literally feel the change in environment as soon as I got off the bus and stepped foot on the grounds. I honestly believe the devil runs that place. I would often have very weird experiences there. I felt watched 24/7. Things would mysteriously go missing and be found in places where they didn't belong. Things like that. One night, I was in bed, almost asleep. You know that stage where you haven't quite fallen asleep yet? Almost like in between asleep and awake. So I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I wasn't coming out of sleep. I was rather going into it. Anyway, I began to feel as if there was someone sitting on my chest. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could see everything. I looked up to see who was suffocating me. It was a demon about the size of a toddler. It was heavy like a grown man. I could even see underneath my bed, even though I was lying on my back. The demon under the bed was pushing the bed up with its feet. The one on the top was pushing my chest down with its weight. I could barely get air in my lungs, but because the one underneath was pushing up, I was able to get some air in. It was like a hospital bed that raises the head area, only I didn't have that type of bed. For some reason, there was a Bible verse flashing in my head. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I kept asking myself, how could any of this be good? Suddenly, my bedroom door started to open, leaking light into the room. I saw my friend standing at the door. She told me, in an authoritative manner, "You know you can rebuke those demons, right? I'm not going to help you, because you have the power to do it. I gave you that power a long time ago." I was confused. Then it hit me. It wasn't my friend talking, it was Jesus. I looked at my door again, and suddenly he was standing right there watching. In my desperation to protect my unborn baby, I used whatever strength I had left to say, "The blood of Jesus covers me." I felt the top of the bed underneath me drop to the floor. The demons vaporized into a black, smoky cloud. I opened my eyes and finally caught my breath. I began crying and praising the Lord. The next morning, my sister came over to help me clean up. I told her what happened. When we were making my bed, we noticed that the floor was indented in the spot where the headboard was located. If you know anything about New York City projects, then you must know that the floors are made of concrete. Shortly after that experience, I had the church come bless my home with a service. Nothing ever happened again after that. I moved 2 years after living there. Last I heard, a man murdered his girlfriend in that apartment. He died at the hands of the police, yelling something about the devil possessing him.
"2017. I was a freshman in college. My family helped me out a bit, but we weren't loaded financially, so I needed to earn some money to support myself. I found work as a security officer. For my first night of work, I was to be stationed at a recently closed factory that was slated to be demolished to make way for condos. I wasn't from that state or that town and knew none of its history, but my roommate, he did. I remember we had just finished watching season 1 of a series of unfortunate events on Netflix. That's when I told him about the job, and he advised me to turn it down. But it was all I could find, and I needed the cash. I asked him why, and he told me it was haunted. Over the past decades, many people have tragically died there, while others went missing. I thought he was joking, but he was dead serious. His own grandfather was a foreman there. He went to work one day and never came back. That was 20 years ago. I asked him to say a prayer for me, as he was the religious type. I went to my first day of work and Benny, a grizzled old-timer, greeted me. After giving me the 411 about the site, I asked him if he had seen anything strange. He asked me if I carried a Bible with me. I said no, and he offered to lend me his. I graciously declined, and he walked off saying, "God be with you." I was a bit perplexed, wondering if the entire town was batty. My parents were hippies that met at Woodstock. They believed in karma and that we were our own gods and goddesses. Never once do I recall entering a church or ever owning a Bible. It was a brisk Friday night. The winds were strong and the empty factory came alive with strange noises. A couple of hours had passed. I was a bit on edge, so I decided to tour the factory. The electricity inside had been shut off, so I used my flashlight. I saw big machines and conveyor belts, offices and storage areas, huge windows blanketed the wall, letting in the moonlight. I heard a loud crashing noise, which caused me to flinch. I went in its direction to see if it was a squatter. My job description included sending off all vagrants, but not being issued a weapon was problematic and cause for concern. A few boxes had fallen over, but how? Then he said the factory was empty. A deep chill befell me. I could see my own breath, but it wasn't that cold outside yet. I became uneasy when I saw a man in factory apparel walk across the room. I said, "Hello? You're not supposed to be here." But he didn't acknowledge me. I gave chase as he went around the corner, but he was gone. I questioned my vision and kept walking around. As I passed by a tall stack of pallets, they suddenly toppled to the ground, nearly killing me. I became woozy and I dropped to my knees and began vomiting for no apparent reason. I picked up my flashlight and decided I was done exploring. I was deep inside the factory and had lost my way. The flashlight began to flicker, and I couldn't understand why, since it was fully charged. I felt the cold again. I saw my breath again and feared the worst. My flashlight went out completely. I stood still for a few moments. I began to look around when I felt something cold grab my ankle. I jumped higher than I ever jumped before. I quickly turned around and saw nothing. That was the last straw. I was going to get away from there as fast as I could. I started to run back. I was almost there when a paralysis hit me and I couldn't move. My breathing elevated and panic set in. I spotted a dark, blurred figure moving about with my peripheral vision. I couldn't make it out. It moved from one side to the other fast. It was either checking me out or sizing me up. But either way, I felt imminent danger. I was able to speak, and instinctively I said, "Jesus, please help me," over and over a few times. Soon after, I had regained control of my body. The hidden figure had vanished, and the freezing cold air was gone. I believe the only reason I made it out at all was because I called out to him. I resigned the following day. I gave Benny a call and apologized for not accepting his warning and help. He told me he has an extra Bible he'd like to give me. And you know what? I still have that Bible.
My whole life, I've never believed in anything, especially not concerning the paranormal or the supernatural. That most definitely includes aliens. But after what happened to me days before the fall of 2001, I have no further doubt in my mind that we are not being told the truth about this subject. I was at home watching the news, but then around 8 p.m., I started to tremble. I have diabetes, so my sugar was very low because I had forgotten to eat all day. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich and some coffee. I fed my dog and sat with my food in front of the TV set. I fell asleep with the TV on. I woke up to some static sounds around 11:15. What happened next has turned me into a recluse. I work from home, I don't have friends, and I don't go out. Not anymore. I tried to figure out what was happening to the TV. No channel was working. I turned it off and went to the bathroom. Then I started messing with my radio and got the same thing, more static. Once I gave up on that, I saw from the corner of my eye lights flickering from my windows. I walked slowly and peeked through the curtains. I saw a huge sphere-shaped object floating in the middle of the street on my block. Every other house in my street had all their lights off, and it was like a ghost town. Other than that thing, all of a sudden, some black cars drove up out of nowhere. Some very tall men with black suits and bowler hats got out and started to examine the object. It was about 20 dudes. The odd thing is that it was so quiet outside. No noise was coming from anywhere. My heart started to pound. My breaths were becoming shallow and fast-paced. One of the men noticed me. I panicked and darted toward my bedroom. I got my gun out of the safe and stood quietly about 10 feet from my door. How the hell did he even notice me? I thought. It's like they could hear my heart pounding or something. I tried to call the police, but the phone line was dead. Someone started banging on my front door, then my back door. Before I knew it, the banging was in the walls. I let out a shrieking scream as I darted out of my room with the intention of standing my ground. Stupid, I know, but as soon as I started what I thought was going to be my blaze of glory, the banging stopped and was replaced with the sound of running. I sheepishly peeked out of my blinds to see those men scurrying back to their vehicles, and that floating thing was gone. I noticed that one of the men had some sort of fluid dripping out of his ear. It was like blood, but seemed more like the color of charcoal liquid that doctors give to people who OD on pills. They all sped off so fast. Again, no sound from the cars. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I asked a few of my neighbors if any of them heard anything notable that night. Nothing. Most of my neighbors go to bed early, but this was ridiculous. One thing they did all say was that they fell asleep around 8 p.m. the night before while watching the news. Fast forward a few weeks, I was at work submitting some paperwork. one of my coworkers said that I had a phone call on line 4. When I picked up the phone, a man tells me the following: "Don't speak, just listen. The men you saw in your house were not human. These guys are the ones they send when there's an encounter anywhere on Earth. They have been watching you since that night. Do not interact with them or talk about your experience with anyone. They will never stop watching you." Then I just heard a click. I tried to see if I could get the number from the caller ID, but to no avail. That night, while asleep, I had a dream that made my fears even worse. I saw myself peeking out of my window just as I did that fateful night. But this time, instead of a sphere, I saw a school bus. I saw those men in black guiding children of all ages into the bus. Their faces looked pale and had a blank expression. They looked drugged and tired. I looked up at the sky and I saw the clouds parting as they spelled something out. It read "cover up." After that night, I started seeing those men everywhere, always in pairs and watching me. They weren't even hiding the fact that they were following me. I would even see them parked outside my house, so I told my boss that I wouldn't be able to come into work anymore. He's a nice guy, so he just lets me fax everything in. This is what turned me into a hermit. I am homebound over something that I still don't fully understand. I stopped seeing those men a few weeks after I started working from home. I do everything online. I know this all sounds crazy, but I know what I saw.
I was about 9 years of age. My friends and I would often leave the safety of the schoolyard and roam the neighborhood at recess. My best bud at the time was Scott. We'd buy candy, toss rocks into the river, and visit nearby playgrounds. Boys from junior high would bully us. One cold and cloudy day, they crossed the line. Steven, the smallest of our group, was having an asthma attack, but they took his inhaler and wouldn't give it back. Scott and I were big for our age, and together, we stood up to them. An ominous thunder boomed. Scott picked up a rock and threw it at a boy named Jamal. It hit his forehead regrettably, but he dropped the inhaler. Everyone paused a moment. I picked up the inhaler and gave it to Steven. Raindrops started to fall. Jamal's forehead trickled blood. Our other friends ran, prompting Scott and I to run. We booked it towards Scott's neighborhood, Jamal in hot pursuit. Across from Scott's home was a lot with an unsightly abandoned house. A couple of locked gates and a tall wooden fence kept it off limits. It was in sore need of renovations or demolition. It gave me goosebumps each time I'd walk by, and Scott absolutely hated it. Scott knew of a loose board around back, and we used it, barely squeezing through. Heavy rain began falling, drenching us both within seconds. We peeked through a crack and spotted Jamal run past. I let out a sigh of relief. I noticed the grounds were in desperate need of landscaping and trash removal. Scott said that for as long as he could remember, the house had stood vacant. A family had been executed inside, gangland style, back in the 50s. The house was then purchased by the mafia and kept empty for 30 years, reasons unknown. Scott's neighborhood was a mix of mostly Italian and Irish families. On the corner was a swanky and exclusive Italian restaurant. Expensive cars with men in fancy suits and beautiful women would go in to drink and dine. Scott told me they were mafia and that people from the neighborhood were part of it. I had no clue what a mafia was. He showed me a movie on his new Betamax called The Godfather. He surmised that the abandoned house was, and I quote, a cemetery house. People had been buried inside and even murdered. From his bedroom window, one can see the back of the cemetery house. He has heard and seen strange happenings in the middle of the night. He told me that Bad Luck Louie, a notorious gambler, drinker and loudmouth from the neighborhood, has been missing for over a year and is buried there. His evidence, a keychain that Louie always hung from his belt. It had a 4-leaf clover and a rabbit's foot. He saw it in the backyard of cemetery house, blood on the rabbit's foot, when he mistakenly threw a ball into the yard one day and came across it. I wanted to leave, but Scott said Jamal might catch us and suggested we go inside cemetery house and get out of the rain. Scott proceeded in alone. I mulled the idea over for a minute or two, then went inside. Surprisingly enough, the back door wasn't locked. The house was leaky. Rain made its way inside. It was cold, lit only by natural light from the outside. I called out to Scott. I heard his voice, but couldn't tell where it was coming from. I saw a door. It led to the basement. Do I dare head down? I heard Scott yell. It sounded like it came from down the hall. Basement crisis averted. I saw Scott backing slowly away from a door until he pressed against the wall. I walked up to him, turned, and looked in. It was a bathroom. A repulsing odor filled it. A trail of dried blood led to the bathtub. A mound of clothes off in a corner. A flashlight on the sink. I moved the moldy shower curtain, disturbing a group of flies. I swatted at them and looked down into the tub. To my dismay, I saw a dismembered body. The eyes on the face of the severed head stared back at me. I turned and vomited my lunch. I walked over to Scott. He was in shock. I turned and saw Bad Luck Louie. He was alive. He didn't say a word. He just pointed down to the basement. Scott wanted to leave, but I wanted to know what was inside the basement. I grabbed the flashlight off the sink and we all went down into the basement. In it were bloodied tools and bottles of chemicals, metal barrels and plastic bags. A large table with straps. Bad Luck Louie pointed to a bag in the corner. I went over past Louie and looked inside. It couldn't be. Inside was Louie's body, his throat slit. I turned quickly and Louie was gone. I grabbed Scott and we flew out of there and we didn't look back. Scott and I are still friends to this day. That experience bonding us closer than ever.
Our mother was a complicated woman. She showed love in a complicated way. I was the second oldest of 4. Our ages were 13, 11, 5, and 3. I didn't know if it was because of liquor or because my father abandoned her after years of torment. Whatever the reason, we got the crap end of the deal. We were all born in Puerto Rico. Both of my parents were in the same Santeria coven. My mom was a high-level witch. Her duties included spying on prominent politicians and celebrities, churches, local businesses, and even institutions like clinics and schools. A master infiltrator. She traveled regularly and reported to the chapter leaders. Their chapters are all over the world. My dad was a hitman. I think that made him a better person in my eyes. He would just end it really fast. But to intrude on someone's life, that's much more nefarious. He killed many people. As I alluded earlier, my mom had a drinking problem. On certain nights, she would make us take part in one of her sadistic rituals. She would say that her saints demanded this. It's better for me to do this than for my demons to take you, she'd say. My older sister got the worst of it. We were told to line up side by side in the basement. My mother would open the deep freezer and pull out a frozen ham. The ham would be placed on a small round table along with a very sharp knife, a bottle of dark rum, a pack of Newports, a lighter, and an ashtray. Right next to the table was a dirty yellow armchair with a matching footstool. My mother would sit on the chair and it would begin. First, she would light up a smoke and take a puff. Next, she'd pick up the knife and cut off some of the ham and eat it. Another chunk of ham would follow, but not for her to eat. It would fly across the room and hit one of us. Have you ever felt a piece of frozen ham hit you? It feels like you're getting stoned. It leaves a burning mark. Anyway, if one of us would cry or utter the slightest sounds, she would take a whole ham and throw it at my big sister. Then she would make her pick it up and hand it to her again. The process would repeat until one of two things happened. She was too drunk to go on, or her bottle was empty. This type of abuse went on for years, but my big sister Waleska was getting too big even for my mother to handle. One day, when she was 17, She walked in to find my mother beating me. She lost it. She beat my mother really bad. My sister left the house that day, and I didn't see her again for many years after that. Things got worse when my sister left. There was no denying it. It wasn't the liquor or my father leaving. My mother was possessed. I remember the house occasionally getting very cold at night. It was strange because we lived in San Juan. I would keep extra blankets in my room. On certain nights, when multiple blankets couldn't keep me warm, I would read my Bible and pray. This cold was not natural. I could actually see my breath in the moonlight coming from my bedroom window. It was the only light I was allowed at night. I would pray every night. I even started going to the Pentecostal church down the street. I wanted what those people had. They were so full of joy and peace. So I converted. My mother was furious, but her religion demands free will. So she couldn't stop me. But on nights when I would go to church, she would make me pay for it. She would wait until I was sleeping, and then I would wake up to her beating me up and laughing like a witch. I would rebuke her in the name of Jesus. She would stop and fall into a trance-like state. I would take her to her room, put her in bed, lock my bedroom door, and pray until dawn. It was the only way to keep her demons from using her against me. The last night I spent with her was one of the scariest things I had ever lived through. I was 20 years old and working. I had saved up for my own place. I had the keys, but I was housebroke. I was afraid for my little brother and sister. My mom didn't know what I was up to, but I was going to take those babies with me. My older sister was living in New York, and we had reconnected. She had been paying a lawyer and a PI to keep tabs on us. She was doing well for herself. She told me that she would help me get custody of our siblings. Finally, our last night in that hellhole was here. I waited until after dinner. I sat my mother down and handed her custody papers. I told her that I was leaving and that I was thinking of taking my brother Memo and sister Lila with me. I told her that if she decided to fight me, I would take her to court and she would go to jail for abuse, among other things. All she had to do was sign the papers, and she would be kid-free. She was still relatively young and could get a boyfriend or something. I even offered to pay her a monthly stipend with the help of my older sister. She stood very quiet. After about a minute, she broke the silence with the stroke of a pen. It was over, I thought, but not quite. She got up, went to her room, and slammed the door shut. I suddenly got a bad feeling in my gut. The Spirit of the Lord came upon me and told me not to sleep in my room that night. So I decided to bunk my little brother and sister instead. I secured the door with a chair. Like many nights before, I awoke from the cold. But there was also a smell of smoke. This didn't make any sense. I began to hear my mom's voice yelling fire. I woke up my younger sister and brother and told them we needed to go. I opened the door and held their hands tight. We ran about halfway down the hallway when we realized there was no fire. The small smoke was gone. Confused, we looked at each other in fear. Then the chill came back. We turned around slowly, and there was our mother, all the way at the end of the dark corridor and levitating as she opened all the windows, one at a time. She stopped suddenly right in front of the moonlit windows. Her face was pale and contorted. Her eyes were yellow. We all ran outside, got in the car, and booked it to my pastor's house. They later gathered some men to accompany me for my possessions. We agreed to keep the authorities uninvolved as long as she stood away. Many years later, my mother became very ill. On her deathbed, she repented and asked us all for forgiveness. I saw the peace in her face. I knew she was forgiven.
Our family was too big for our house in Bradenton, Florida. Our parents decided it was time to move. Eventually, my father found the deal of a lifetime, a large Spanish-style 2-story stucco home with tile roof in a wonderful area near a bayou and the Manatee River. The house was fabulous, but now we know why it was such a great deal. We all started having strange and unexplained experiences often. Every so often, I would lie awake at night and hear people talking outside my door in the hallway. They did not speak to me, and I do not recall making sense of anything spoken, just voices. My dear aunt had given me a long string of love beads. They were special to me. Some time later, my family went away on vacation. Upon returning, my love beads were broken into equal segments and placed one segment above the other on my dresser top. No one had access to the house. One evening, my family and I enjoyed a long walk after dinner, about an hour or so. Upon returning home, we found muddy footprints trailing from the front door leading all the way down the hallway. What we found particularly strange about this, other than the fact that there were muddy footprints in our home, is that there was indeed no muddy area to get that much mud on one's shoes even if one tried. Another day, I was alone at home and taking a shower in the upstairs bathroom. I heard a tremendous racket. I exited the bathroom to find the heavy old Venetian blinds in my parents' bedroom banging against the window frame. I also heard from the rear and was able to view my sister's room just as the blinds were in the middle of stopping. No windows were open. This freaked me out so much, I fled the house. The next year, I left for college and never had another experience again. I come from a colorful bunch of Indian tribes on both my mom and dad's side: Blackfoot, Cherokee, Choctaw and Shawnee, and Chippewa. Growing up, we would always hear about how our Sky Brothers, aliens to everyone else, founded all the Native American tribes. They had a keen interest in my family's abilities. My great-grandma had such a gift to see the future, it was almost scary. You couldn't get away with anything. At times, she'd even know what you were thinking. When she spoke, family and friends listened. Most of my family is in some way gifted, and almost always takes jobs that deals with the dead, police, doctors, funeral workers, and so on. Back in '83, my mom and uncle were working for a funeral home. My uncle tricked my mom by telling her that when a woman dies, that you can look down her mouth and look directly out of her vagina. My mom fell for it, but here is where it took an interesting turn. 2 years later, a woman we'll call Doris passed away, and my mom got curious. Apparently, Doris was furious about my mom violating her like that. So that night, when my mom and uncle got home, they received a phone call from the recently dearly departed. The caller asked to speak with Doris. My mom and uncle were horrified. All the warnings that we grew up hearing all came rushing back. My uncle told the caller that Doris had passed away. The calls continued on a regular basis for my mother. Even when she went to Germany during the first Gulf War, coordinating flights for our soldiers. It got so irritating for my mother that after a while, she started hanging up. That made Doris angry. On one occasion, my mother was attacked. The details I'll keep to myself, but I can tell you that she was hurt badly in an isolated area. Now, our family has this thing where we can feel if one of us is in harm's way. Sometimes we have the ability to affect the surrounding area of the one hurt. Somehow we managed to send a message to a cab driver who helped my mother out. That message was sent telepathically. He said that he was driving and heard our call. He spun around and drove right to the spot where my mother was. Because of her injuries, my mom was sent home and could no longer serve. After years of similar occurrences, my mother decided to make amends with Doris' ghost. Needless to say, the incident stopped. Many odd things have happened to my family over the years. We've seen UFOs, aliens, and more. I continue to have paranormal experiences to this day.
Hey there, Dezombified friends. We're going to be doing something new on our channel. Every now and then, we're going to be giving some due props to creators that have in some way or another influenced us. This time, we'd like to give a special shout out to Dark Waters. Dark Waters is one of the first fellow YouTubers who subscribed to our channel. He is someone we used to watch way before there was a Dezombified. Although Dark Waters didn't know us from a hole in the wall, he still invested a subscription on us. We are honored because he's a spectacular narrator. For that, we're grateful. Hey Dark Waters, if you're listening, thank you. If you'd like to know more about Dark Waters, check out all of his links down below. Thanks again for watching. Thank you for watching a compilation of 9 scary viewer-submitted horror stories here on Dezombified TV. Don't forget to like this video, share it, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be alerted of new content. And as always, Dezombified friends, watch your 6.